Hello, this is Walter Bradley. We're in Heart Talk, and we have a special guest today, Dan Hennen. And just like Catherine Michelle, we're dealing with the Crowley case in Minnesota, in which a strange, what I appear to think of as a murder, and not a murder-suicide. And we have with us Greg Fernandez Jr. of Mind, Body, Soul Productions, and this is Heart Talk. I'm Walter Bradley. And now, let's get right to the point here. We're looking at a very strange case, and Dan has been researching this case, and we want to get his viewpoints and get the salient areas that he's been looking at to present an opposing view to the conclusion of the Crowley case, in which we've had some, well, let me let Dan take it away and just describe what's going on here. Dan, welcome to Heart Talk, and let's talk about this case, the Crowley case, and your viewpoint on that.
Well, thank you. This is a very interesting case. I live also here in Minnesota in a town called Chaska, which is 30 minutes away from Apple Valley. And Apple Valley, Minnesota, is where the crime took place back 4 years ago. And I was interested in the case because, number one, of the proximity, and I had also used to live in Apple Valley. So at one time I lived there literally probably 4 blocks away from that very house where the killings took place. So I have a vested interest to some extent into this case just because of the proximity. And so I've been following it from the very beginning. And what really caught on was the strange scenario of this situation. So that's really what got me interested in the case. As a parent, and I think most parents out there, when you have children, you can't imagine situations like this case, where the children, or in this particular case, just one child, was murdered. And so this was a case 4 years ago that 911 was called to dispatch because there was 3 dead bodies laying on the living room floor on a rambler in a medium level town, neighborhood, I should say, not high end, not low end, but single family homes. And neighbors found bodies inside. Police were called to the scene, came in and noticed the adult male, David Crowley, age 29, next to his wife, Comel Crowley, age 28, and near them is their 5-year-old daughter, Rania. All dead, believed to be a single gunshot to the head, and police investigated the case and took it that the father, David, because a pistol was next to his left hand, had killed his wife with a gunshot to the back of the head, his daughter with a gunshot to the back of the head, and then turned the weapon on himself, and the bodies were there roughly 3 weeks. And so neighbors found the bodies that were partially going through the decomposition stage. And so this was very strange to begin with because typically your situation with suicides is if you're dealing with your demons or your depression or what have you, you will go off, more than likely kill yourself and do it, more than likely alone and out of the way, and then leave a lengthy note that is signed, and your wishes are mentioned, and your reasons and your excuses and everything like that. So this didn't have anything like that in the story, and so it was very odd to begin with. And the reason I followed the case, it was 2 days later, and the article appeared in the news, and it said that a father kills his wife and his child before turning the gun on himself. So that caught my eye, looked into it, and said that he was working on a project that went south. David Crowley was a filmmaker, an aspiring filmmaker, director, producer, and was working on spent a couple, 2-3 years on a project that he was going to produce called Gray State. And it was kind of a documentary, big screen movie it was going to be, but talking about the fall of the United States and the problems that we have encountered and what's going on here and kind of foreshadowing the U.S. falling into a police state with militarized police and whatnot. That project, evidently, we were told, wasn't going too well. He was rejected, turned down, went into depression, was despondent. His wife turned despondent. They all three shut themselves off from family, friends, and neighbors. And over the Christmas holiday break of 2014, all of them were found dead. And so the speculations really arose right out of the gate. So I created a Facebook group page called Justice for David Crowley and Family to start throwing out some ideas and some investigative research and starting to link these things together from various articles that were out, because most of the articles that first appeared were outside the nation. The UK, the Daily News, had the first articles that I saw of this case that really picked up. There were international news. Okay. And then later the local news picked up, and a couple days later it was done and it was flushed out from the news cycle. And that was really all we've heard of it. And at that point already, the police were investigating it as a double homicide followed by a suicide, which didn't make sense to me. So I created that page and on Facebook, and started to get others with like minds together, because this just didn't pass the smell test, so to say. Well, so that's my involvement, I guess, how I got started and how I got interested in this case.
Well, when I looked at just cursory look at the facts of the case, the thing that came up to me immediately was they were all three murdered. Now, what concerned me is how quickly, based on the reports, that they considered it a murder-suicide based on evidence that was there, and even a neophyte investigator, it seems to me, would not be able to come to that conclusion. Is that a direct for the first time yourself?
That's fair to say. When the investigators first looked into this, it was the city of Apple Valley. Their police department and their detectives were assigned to this case there. Apple Valley is a city of about 45,000 people population, so it's just outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul as a suburb. And so their detective staff is maybe 5 or 6 people. They looked into this case. For their first press release was suspicious deaths, or suspicious three bodies found in a suspicious case. The very next day, they were treating it as a double homicide suicide, and by the day after that, they already basically had that narrowed down and were just finishing up the reports, and the crime scene was opened up. The house, it was roped off, I think, for one day. And that was really the end of it. They said, this guy did it. He must have went crazy, flipped out, and that was the end of the case. And so after that, it took a while to officially close it. By the time they got the information back, the test results, the lab results, the medical examiner, the coroner, the BCA, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension did some investigation too, and took the sample swabs, and the bullet fragment analysis and all this stuff started coming in. The bodies are found in January in the state of Minnesota, where it is cold. The bodies were there for roughly 3 weeks, and so they closed this case off and basically was done. But yet, once we started filing FOIA requests and getting the information, once the case was closed, we found out that some of these reports were coming back in April or May. Some of these test results were coming back the following June and July. Some of the DNA and the analysis and further investigation was coming back, September and October of the year 2015. And so they had already basically closed this off and said that David did it when it didn't make sense to. I don't have a background in investigation. I don't have a background in law enforcement. I'm an accountant by trade, so I started looking at this from a business or a financial standpoint, and that's where some of the anomalies started coming up. But it was that very next year, on the 1-year anniversary, they said they closed the case. This was 2016, and said David did it. We've got the evidence, the proof. He killed his wife, his daughter. He went nuts. He went crazy. There was marijuana in the house. He may have been drinking. and doing drugs, and so they kind of piled it all on David, this husband and the father, that his project didn't work. He was depressed, he was isolated, he was despondent, he was drinking, using drugs. Then they got into the fact that there was a volatile relationship, that he was into abuse, there was violence, domestic abuse. That's what really struck out for me, is that they started piling on. It wasn't just one or two reasons, it started to be 15 reasons, which seemed very odd. And then when you look back and do a little research, most, if not all of those, didn't pan out to even be true. So that really got us thinking, why are they saying all of these things when this certainly wasn't the case?
Well, that's what stood out to me, because I understand he's a believer. And being from that camp, so to speak, in the Bible, and being one who's concerned about family, and it is really heightened greatly, because in that arena, family is really tight and generally in better state than most families. I won't say it's perfect, it's not. But when there are difficulties, they have resources that they use, and things and outcomes are generally better. In this case, it was strange to me that a man who had that background would blow up and kill his family and nobody knew about any problems. Because generally in a community of faith, they reach out to people and say, oh, I've got some difficulties. And there are people and family members who would know of the problems. I didn't see a real indication of that, in which there was a concern for David or his wife in those accusations that they were, totally depressed. And it would be beyond clinical. It would be, dead to the world, retreat from the world, run away. And
I don't know. I don't know how much, I don't know if we know how spiritually involved he really was. How much of a Christian was he? Was he open? Was he private about it? Because I can't find a whole lot. Dan, maybe, I don't know what you found on it, but I haven't found a whole lot to suggest that he was a Christian or a practicing Christian.
Yeah, here's what I think. David came from a Christian family, and he had a older brother and an older sister, and then parents that lived in the area. When he was growing up, after he graduated high school, I believe, is when his parents divorced. And so I don't think that, and I don't believe when David, in David's adult life, that he was not a regular church goer. His family was raised Christian, and I think they went several times a year, perhaps. I don't want to speculate, but they were not every single day, every Sunday going. Now, his wife, who was Pakistani, his wife, Kamel, was Pakistani. She was raised Muslim, and so when she came over to the United States, and her family moved to Texas, and that's how he ended up meeting her when he enlisted in the Army. He was stationed at Fort Hood, and so he ended up meeting her. Her family came from a very strong Muslim family. He came from a fairly strong, I guess, above average Christian family, and then the two got married. And so some of the speculation that we don't know is, some say that in order to get married, she had to renounce her Muslim faith and convert to Christianity. Maybe she did that, maybe she didn't. Some say that they were just, religion wasn't that big of a factor in their relationship, so they let it slide. And so we don't really know the case. Now, I myself, as a Christian, looked at it like yourself, Walter. I looked at it from that background, because I thought, well, this just doesn't ring true, the situation here, as far as what they did. What we see is a loving family. Religion was important, but it wasn't on the front burner, so to say.
Right.
And they were raising their little daughter, Rania, in a very, I think, a loving, healthy, very good relationship, family relationship, and they were starting their own trends and traditions and whatnot. So they were doing very good, I think. Now, that's not to say that they, as a couple or a family, didn't go through their rough spots and bumps in the road, as what came out here. This case is 4 years old, so we've now seen that there were things and bumps in the road along the way. That wasn't all rose-colored glasses. That wasn't all good. but it certainly was not something that would lead someone to, go down that road of murdering their family. Not that that doesn't happen, but as you said earlier, that there was nothing to indicate this level of violence, this level of PTSD was thrown in there too, because he was came home as a vet from Afghanistan and Iraq. So all these accusations came out, and then once we started separating the wheat from the chaff here in this case, then we started to get the true reason and the true clearer picture, should I say, of what was really going on here. And then we started ruling out what is said as far as what the narrative is, or the official narrative, versus what really went on here. And that's how we started deducing what could not have taken place. And that's the best way to look at it, I think, is you start ruling out what didn't happen, then you can back into what more than likely did happen.
Yes, and I agree, and I think that this would involve more than one person being involved in against the family. They would have to control it to get to that point, and there's a purpose that they're doing it. There's a motive. You don't kill 3 people like that without there being a purpose involved, a motive and a reason. And he had business associates that they traced as possible people who could have been involved. But I was looking more at the angle of his film that he was trying to get produced. And he was the type of person, I believe, and especially based just on what I've heard of him, that he was committed to this project, and there was a good amount of money out there involved in the procedure of getting it going. Greg, you had that information, I believe. But the interest in me is, and my perception seems to indicate that this may have been something more to do with the revelatory factor in the government realm of this feature film he was doing, which was headed to television, possibly. And I think that...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dan's done some great research on that whole angle, too.
And that's what I was looking at. And I really think that his angle and the information he made, especially of him being part of the government and being in the military in Afghanistan, there are things that they did over there that they don't want us to know about, and the reason that they went to Afghanistan had other directions.
Yeah, that's been some of the hardest stuff to find out about David, is the whole military history. He was only there for, 5 years, maybe 6 years, because he got stop loss, I think. But I've been having a hard time finding exactly. I mean, I get a lot of theories, a lot of stuff, but I don't know.
The government was involved in looking up ancient, let's just say, ancient things. And when this all started, even, there was no reason for us to go and, jump Saddam Hussein. All of the things that they were saying were true were not true. They wanted to get into the Middle East, and they were looking for something. And frankly, I don't know what it was, but this could tie into this, because he was there. And they were looking up for ancient texts, things of that nature that they looted and took out of the country, and the government do for government interest, whatever it might have been. And I've heard of these stories, and they have there's a grain of truth to it. And I don't think that when we went to Afghanistan, I was part of the military, and sometimes governmental leaders will see something they want and create a cover story to do what they need to do. This is just part of government. And when this was opening up with Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and the Iraq invasion because of weapons of mass destruction, I smelled a rat, because in every situation where the government of the United States, and it's not just the United States, there are other governments behind them supporting this, and they got a good quote-unquote coalition. And what was the interest? And one of the things when they get over there is they go to ancient sites, ancient digs, ancient areas, Babylon, and these things that are there, and they begin digging into and getting artifacts or things or documents from those museums or locations and carrying them back to where and for what, I don't know. But there's a lot of credibility coming from certain people that say they did take things like that, and that, truth be told, that their frontline interest was more in that than anything else. And tying this to this is that maybe he was doing revelations about things in regards to that and around it, since he was dealing with that anyway, and bringing up quote-unquote government problems and issues and making this movie. I think that could have played heavily into this, what I say would be, if that be indeed the case, an execution, which is sending a message, and the whole family is killed. And then you get the idea of, ooh, don't want to mess with what he was messing with. And as fact of the matter, there's nothing further that the others who had part in this project he was working on, I don't see anybody taking it up and running with it. I think it literally was dead with David, so to speak. And I don't know what your point that perspective would be, but it strikes me as very poignant that he was working on this project and that it could have been inflammatory or revealing things that they did not want to have revealed. There are other factors in play in this also, which they tied it to the family. And the thing they don't put in there is anybody from the outside being in there and doing this. They stayed away from that totally, and when it went to the state, they bounced it. They didn't go into it. So it strikes me as something that has been suppressed, but that suppression has to be coming from a source of authority, because generally police will go, oh, this looks bad. Looks like somebody came in and knocked off all three of these, which was obvious to me that that's what it looked like. And then everybody clams up and closes the case. When there's something at a governmental level, they can tell the local authorities, shut it down. And it appears like that to me, from my perspective. So that is something that was never brought up and wouldn't be brought up by any local or state official. And anytime these cases are quote-unquote buried, there has to be an authority base to bring that about. What do y'all think about that?
Well, here's what I think, Walter, on that. When this case first broke, a lot of people did think that. They assumed that it was a government hit. They assumed it was a wet work team from within the domestic U.S. an assassination carried out, right. Much like the Philip Marshall case. But the 4 years, as far as looking into the facts and the evidence, 4 years later now, I do not believe that is the situation. David was in Iraq. That's where he became awake. He started waking up. He started getting disillusioned about our government and wanted to come home, get married, and start a life. He got called back to go to Afghanistan. He said, I don't want to go. I don't want to be involved in our military anymore. They said, you're under stop loss. We got to send you back. And they said we could put you in a mailroom job or whatever. So he did that. So that was true. So he became woke. In other words, he woke up and was doing things like that and exposing the issues of the government, of this project, of his documentary. Those things were all part of that possible scenario. Now, looking into the facts, as we see how clumsily this murder case took place, we've got it narrowed down now that David, did not do this, so it was a triple homicide, and it was done, we suspect by amateurs. So this was not a wet work team. This was not an assassination squad. This was not done by professionals. This was done by amateurs. And what we believe is the evidence points to someone close to David, close to the family, or close to the project itself. And then it was set up and staged to make it look like a murder-suicide, or even make it look like an assassination by the U.S. Government, or the deep state, or rogue elements in the intelligence. So that's what I think. All those things that you said at the beginning were true. David did awake in the military. He woke up extremely fast. Many of us take many years to start waking up to the big picture of what's really going on. David was very smart, had a high IQ, and was very bright. He picked up this and processed it very fast. So with my background, I looked into the money. Most cases like this, you got to look for the
you do have to follow money,
motive, and opportunity. And so if it wasn't if David didn't do it, and the government didn't do it, then who else would have had the motive, means, and opportunity to carry this out? So what we heard from the very beginning, and even Greg can attest to this, is we kept hearing that David was turned down by big Hollywood producers and didn't get the contract that he wanted. And so I followed that trail. What we found is that an offer was made, roughly a $30 million deal David was sitting on for his project. He had hired an attorney to start putting this deal in the wheels in motion, and he had a couple of producers he was working with in Hollywood. And the evidence shows now, with the information, is that the paperwork was drawn up, the contract was made. It went from an oral contract to a written contract, and they were going through the final phases of working on the options for this deal. Now, what David needed to do was get rid of the two people that was not investors, but co-founders, I think, and he had business ties with. And they said it would be cleaner for you to do this whole thing if you had just yourself, your own name on this project. And so he agreed with the production company and the lawyer to move forward with just his name on this project. And so he went to the two people that were working on other side businesses with him to disclose or remove their rights, any business rights to the film, the project, the company, and the business association, to remove their rights and move forward. So the first individual, Mitch Heil, did that and said, I'll sign away this so you can move forward with your film, and I'll go my way. We can still remain friends. The other individual was Danny August Mason, who was the main character, I guess, in this movie. He says, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. So things started dragging out. And so the evidence shows that the $30 million deal was in play. David didn't get the money, didn't get a dime of it yet, but it was still in play. Before they could move forward, he needed Danny August Mason to be removed. And so when we go down this timeline that I put together on a large spreadsheet in Excel, the timeline is very important here, because you see, as Danny is shutting people, getting closure with some of these business associates, namely Danny August Mason, who's been a friend for several years, it was around the same time that his daughter Ranny's birthday party. And so August of that year, there was a birthday party. They had friends and family over and business associates, and Danny August Mason was one of those. Well, Danny already received the letter, the legal work paper, legal request at this point to sign over his rights to, he put 2 or 3 years into this project, and now his friend is asking him to sign it away. So it became an awkward setting at this birthday party, and then not much was said. I'm sure you get the strange glances, the odd looks, very uncomfortable thing, and the rest of the group there that was there in attendance at the birthday party is they probably didn't let on that this was going on under the ground, beneath the surface, bubbling over. And so several months went on back and forth with neither about to budge on this case. And so what we get is Danny August Mason not willing to give up his rights, his financial rights, or his business rights or claims to this project. But in one of the emails it says, I'll gladly, you give me some of the rights in this, and I'll give you some of the rights in this, and we can kind of go 50-50. and we can make this all work. David says, no, that's not going to happen. You need to sign this off, and then I can move forward. Well, that never happened. So next thing we see, the bodies were dead in December, allegedly found in January, and we never get closure to this whole thing. So me, right there, that means we've got some issue. We've got a Danny August Mason issue where he refused to sign over, and so I go now to the paperwork and the police reports and look at how they investigated Danny August Mason, how they questioned him, how they interrogated him. And what we see in the police reports, and the evidence shows here clearly, is that Danny August Mason was asked what was his role in this project. And he said, I'm just an actor. I don't have a connection to it from a business standpoint or a business owner. I don't have a vested interest. I'm just working here as an actor. I found that to be very strange. And then if you go through the rest of the paperwork, Danny August Mason wasn't questioned at all, wasn't interrogated at all. Now, what we do know is that he lied to investigators by saying he didn't have a role from a business standpoint, whereas he had a very large role. He was the big stakeholder in this project. And in fact, there was 4 months of emails going back and forth with these two gnashing their teeth of digging their heels and not willing to give up rights from what they claimed and all their hard work, blood, sweat, and tears into this project. So it really is questions to me with Danny August Mason. Number one, he wasn't questioned, or number two, when he was asked one simple question, he elected to lie to detectives. So that to me stood out. Now later on, I got a hold of the president of this production company in Hollywood, and I said, you know, there's a lot of speculation that this movie fell through, the deal fell through, David was despondent, and David was isolating himself and was depressed. He said, no, that was nothing farther from the truth. He was excited. He was a hard worker. He was working through the things that we gave him to do. We were going to turn this movie into a web series or an internet Netflix television series or a TV series or a web-based series. They felt there was too much to contain into an hour-and-a-half or a 2-hour big motion picture film. So they're going to go that angle instead. But they said the deal was on. We never cut ties. And that was it. And so now we've got evidence that there was a deal on the table. We've got the evidence from the president himself, and now we've got invoices showing from the legal attorney that from David's attorney that I have released and published onto our Justice group page, showing that a lot of time was hours were billed from the legal side, from the legal assistant and from the attorney himself, going back and forth, making phone calls, conference calls, drafting up legal paperwork regarding all of this. So they were actively pursuing this whole project, actively. So we get this conflicting stories kind of a deal that comes in. So the question is, why did Danny August Mason lie? And so things like that started coming up, and so we've been publishing these things in our group there. That we've got 2,500 members on our page, and our goal is to be transparent. Anything we find out, anything we see, anything we notice from a forensic standpoint, or from a FOIA standpoint, or from banking irregularities, we publish and we push it out there, and we let people make their own decision. We know David didn't do this. Our goal is not to find out who did, but to try to reopen the case and also to reopen up people's eyes that, number one, we've got killers on the loose, we've got murderers on the loose, and those more than likely who were responsible for this may have been very close to David and his family from a working business relationship and a family relationship. So we've got all these different things coming into mix, and all we're trying to do is narrow things down. And so I've got the other things that we're focused on is the conflicting forensics and the conflicting, what I would call the intangibles in this case, circumstantial things that don't add up. And there's so much of them that now they become more than just mere coincidences. And so what would you like to get into next? Any one of those topics?
Well, one of the things that come up for me is when you murder somebody and you're in presence in the facility or the home or wherever you are, you leave behind something. You're never clean. And what is the evidence pointing at? I heard of a fingerprint being on the gun. Were you aware of that? That was not David's, and they couldn't quite make it out, but it wasn't his. Was that something that came up? And
yeah, there are some good points. There are some good points like that, especially from a forensics, and we try to stay with the facts rather than making opinions and suggestions. So when the police report came out and the case was closed, we were able to get all of this information. We know for a fact that there was no breaking and entering. The front door was shut and closed. The back rear slider door was unlocked, slightly ajar, which was very interesting. The back sliding patio door. And like you said, there was a gun at the scene near David's left hand. David is right-handed. There was no fingerprints of David found on that weapon. There was a partial fingerprint that was unknown or couldn't have been identified. But then in the cartridge, where the magazine slides up into that, it was a .40 caliber Springfield handgun that he had, and the weapons used, bullets used were hollow points, which are also strange enough that you would use a hollow point on a suicide just to simply kill yourself. And so there was a fingerprint in blood on the cartridge, David's blood. So somewhere along the way, David was bleeding. Now we don't know why he would have been bleeding if he killed himself. Now at the end, during that final gunshot, yes, there'd be blood all over from David, but blood, not brain matter, not tissue, was found on that inside cartridge. So he'd already been bleeding when he put that cartridge in, which was another strange red flag. The bullet that killed David allegedly was found in the ceiling, in the attic. It went through the ceiling. There's a hole in the ceiling, found in the attic, and when tested, it shows there was no blood, David's blood, no blood of any person was even on that bullet fragment. And so this, like you said, it's a hollow point. It's going to open up. It's going to expand and mushroom, going through the head, the skull, and the brain, up into the sheetrock in the ceiling and bounce around up in the attic. It had David's touch DNA only on it. And he would have, I believe, would have had all those bullets would have had his touch DNA probably on it, because he noted.
That found in the ceiling did not have any blood or matter on it?
Correct.
See, that's one thing that when you're trying to kill yourself, you're not shooting bullets around. And why was the bullet there? And it's in the ceiling. It's like he was on the ground firing up, like he was there. And but there wasn't any evidence of a struggle either. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So that's a glaring fact that I had noted before, is, there's a bullet that was up in the ceiling. That means either the gun went off while he was putting up, or he was aiming that way, or shooting from a low position, or on the ground. There's several factors that could be in play.
Yeah, so here's what we think. A lot of the speculation that we get are also, strangely enough, coming from members of the Gray State Project. They're saying that more than likely he was on his knees and held the gun down by the floor, shot himself up through the head in an upward trajectory while on his knees, looking his head down, and that must have been how the bullet and the fragment and the hole in the ceiling got there. So that's a lot of speculation there, but once again, there's no blood or tissue on that bullet fragment. Now, number one, police really have no evidence that bullet went through any human flesh, much less David's. We know that that's not David's kill shot bullet. The question is, where is the bullet that killed David? No bullets in the house have David's flesh on them. Now, I'll repeat that.
Find the kills.
No bullet in that house, no bullet fragment has David's flesh or blood on it. So the question is, who picked it up, who took it, and why is it gone? Obviously, the dead man didn't pick up and hide his own bullet, but someone more than likely the killers took it home, I believe, probably as a trophy.
They probably cleaned up the scene, obviously, because there were some interesting facts. Missing arm, missing hand, you know. And I understand that his right hand was not present, as they say. Was that found where and they said there were bone fragments. And I don't understand whether they found, you know, finger fragments, you know, bones from the hand, but the hand was missing, I understand. And as I understood, it was the right hand.
Yeah, here's what we got, Walter. It's an interesting case, and Greg can chime in here too as I go along. I'm going to cover that very specific topic. For those of the new listeners out there that haven't heard this case, here is the list of items of the bodies that were missing from the scene. Not found later, not found elsewhere throughout the home, but outright missing from the scene. David's right hand was gone, and that means his fingers, there was no bones found, or his hand, or anything. His right hand was missing. Comel, his wife, her left hand and her right hand were missing. Now the police have said that they think that dog scavenging, there was a dog in the house, was scavenging on the bodies because he was hungry because of this 3-week scenario where the dog didn't eat, so may have been eating, and they're implying here bones and all. And so I question that, but we'll leave that alone. Randy's right arm was missing, the entire arm, forearm, both bones in the arm, the wrist, the hand, everything. And in fact, that arm was removed from the shoulder socket itself. And so there's no bones left if the dog did in fact eat the skin or the tissue. He certainly wouldn't have eaten the entire bones all. The bones were not found in the house. And David and Comel's skulls were missing. Skulls. And so that also means the brain in that skull. Did the dog eat the brain? Did the dog eat the skeleton, skull bones itself of the skull? So there were small fragments leading up to the back of the neck and the vertebrae and the back portion of the skull, but I mean, there was no eye sockets, there was no forehead, there was no, and then there were some pieces of the skull that were found, but the evidence shows that there was no body parts found throughout the house, no body parts found in the basement, in the other sections of the house. There were some small, maybe small splinter bones in the living room, but it wouldn't have certainly accounted for all of the bones that were missing. I think the total bones missing was like 103, 106 maybe. And so the police are still holding firm that the dog consumed everything except a couple random bones that were left at the scene. So all these things are missing. Now we know that David Crowley is right-handed when he shoots. The gun was near his left hand and his right hand was missing. Some out there still believe that this may not even be the Crowley family. When would you ever have a situation like this where all of the identifying parts of the family are missing? Hands, so there's no fingerprints, dental skeletal remains of the teeth, and all of the identifying features are gone. The only hand that was there, David's left hand, but that was in a mummified state with no fingerprint capability. It was in a mummified state. No other body part was in a state like that. So they couldn't take these things. Now, they ended up identifying the bodies due to tattoos, and there was one set of teeth there, which they were able to identify also. So I believe that was the family there, but there are still those out there that believe that the family could have been switched or swapped and essentially living on a witness protection program on some island somewhere. Now, we don't believe that per se, but we're open to all theories. So why would those parts of the bodies be gone, which leads back to the infamous dog? The dog is a 20 to 25 pound beagle mix mid-size, and certainly would be hungry after 3 weeks, but in looking through all of the 476 photos of every inch of that house, there is not one water bowl or a dog bowl, a food bowl in that home. So obviously the dog was would have had to drink out of a water dish, correct?
Yeah.
At some point. Why was that gone? Why was the dog dish gone? Now, there was feces of the dog, mainly in the downstairs basement area, and there was also 2 large bags of dog food in the kitchen area that, if he was hungry enough, certainly could have tipped them over and ripped into those bags of food to eat if he was hungry enough. But the police say that he scavenged off the bodies and survived for 3 weeks off the bodies and the bodies only. So that's very strong. And what some conjecture, what I believe, is you have to account for that water bowl missing and the dog dish bowl missing. Was that also something taken by the killers, taken away? Because sometimes in these photos, crime scene photos, the pictures are important of what you see, but we can't forget about what you don't see in the pictures.
Well, one of the things, as you bring that up, the door being open, ajar. I'm assuming it wasn't open much. I don't have an indication or...
Less than 1/4 of an inch, very small. Dog couldn't have gotten out, per se.
Right. So it suggests to me that somebody left but didn't shut. Is this a sliding glass door, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Or is it okay. That means, I would assume, somebody left out the back. Why wouldn't they shut the door all the way? Why leave it open? They would know what they were doing. And the problem with the missing heads and hands, that's one of the things that stand out to me. No dog could do that, literally, consume the whole head. Yeah, there would be fragments and things if someone was committing suicide. And the police obviously had to overlook that, because that is something that is totally not consistent with a murder-suicide. And a dog, and especially a beagle, that's a pretty small dog. It's not a huge dog. And if he was consuming the bodies, he would eat the flesh. Bones would have little concern. He might chew on a bone, but he's not going to be eating a bone, mostly. That's just pretty much what dogs do. And this, it stands to reason that this was a murder, and that they removed the hand and the heads for a reason. I don't know if identification of the victims was their concern. It could have been trophies or proving something, because sometimes...
Well, there were still a couple parts of the head. I think the whole back part of David's skull was still there, and part of Kamel's skull, I think, was there, but it was mostly gone. But the way that they first told us, it made it seem like both of their heads are gone. And even if you look at the sketch drawing, you'll see that both of their heads are not even in that. They're just out. So that
would be a powerful weapon to blow the whole head completely off. I mean, a .40 caliber is pretty strong, and if you have hollow point, you'll have an entry wound and a large exit wound. It would blow out. And that's what those weapons do. They turn with a hole, and it expands. Hollow point.
But now, how close would you have to be to cause so much damage that a dog could get some type of credit for that? I mean, I know it's just crazy. They just seem to blame the dog for everything. They might as well blame the dog for the whole crime. The
dogs couldn't really do all they're saying, and it doesn't. And there would be evidence of that would prove it, and they haven't offered any. It shows to me that really this was a crime scene that was tampered with. It was. It had to be, because missing hand and an arm jerked from the socket. Now, I'm assuming it wasn't cut, surgically removed. Was it pulled? How was the arm removed from the socket? Because when you pull an arm off, you're going to get jagged rip. There's no indication that I've heard of the condition indicating how the arm was removed. And
What we know is that, because that's a good question. People thought that right away. They're like, well, was it scattered or pulled or yanked, the hands and everything, or was it a clean cut? Was there a saw involved that was easily, by looking at it, you can tell that was cut off. By looking at the police reports, there was nothing cut off, like the hands or the arm, like a straight edge, nice clean cut. It looked as if things were yanked and pulled, enough so that it led the investigators to believe that the dog, in fact, ripped these, ripped the bones off from the flesh. Now, the interesting thing is, on all of these body parts, is you get the daughter's arm. Ranny's 5 years old. The arm is missing, and it's noted in the police report that it was pulled from the socket itself. Now, a dog couldn't pull it from the socket, but we also did find, in looking at the medical examiner's report, is that Ranny did have suffered a small fracture of a rib beneath her armpit that was cracked. And so, if one would to lead to believe if that was a human foot getting leverage to yank that off, could certainly account for a fractured rib. I don't believe a dog could fracture a girl's rib, and I also know for a fact that a dog could not pull an arm out of the socket itself.
No.
Regardless what the decomposition state of the body is. Now, a large dog perhaps, but not this dog we're talking about here. So what are your thoughts, Walter, on that information?
Well, first of all, it's a beagle. My dad had a beagle, and I was aware that dog wasn't very big, and when I heard it was a beagle, he cannot rip arms or hands off. And if it were done, there would be parts laying about, and beagle doesn't add up to what they're saying, first of all. And with that fracture, that means there was some leverage and something to brace for the pulling action. Somebody it shocks me that someone would want to rip an arm off, but that's seemingly, based on evidence, what has happened. And on David, ripping the arm off. Now, was his wife, Camille, what was missing on her? Did she?
Both hands. And she was lying down, Greg, and let's confirm this. She was lying on her stomach with both hands removed, and her arms were crossed underneath her, and they blamed the dog at ripping off the hands, which means he would have had to nudge her up to even get at the hands, because the hands were crossed underneath under the breasts, and the hands were missing underneath her. So the dog, I find that hard to believe the dog doing any of the damage on Comel's missing hands whatsoever.
Well, that was what I first thought, was that those hands were crossed. But if you look at that sketch, it actually looks like so she's lying down, facing west. Her head is facing west, and her right arm looks like it's over her head, and that hand is gone. And then it looks like her left hand is under her stomach, and that hand is gone too. So I first thought that they were both crisscrossed, because I couldn't understand how the heck, even if a dog did do that, there's no way it could do it unless it's grabbing at the hands and rips them apart or something. But
and there's
look at that sketch.
Yeah, there's another thing to note as well, Walter. You may not have seen the picture or the diagram, and what Greg is saying is correct, that one of the diagrams does show the sketch that the arm was out. Now, where Comel was laying, face down on the living room floor, was not out in the open for the dog to be able to get at both arms. She was kind of tucked in close to a sectional couch on both sides. Near her head and near her right side was a sectional couch. So even if the dog had access to one of the hands, I can buy that. I can believe that. It doesn't account for the other hand, which is either under her or up against that couch, a sectional couch. And so we've got a little problem here. One hand Perhaps the dog did, but certainly couldn't have done both of where and how she was lying. So once again, we keep running into these roadblocks that, things.
That's a big one. I'm going to have to write that one down because I keep forgetting about that one.
That it was post-mortem that the hands and arms were removed.
Hand is under her, but it's...
See, the thing is...
How does the dog eat the hand and then put it back on her? Okay.
See, he didn't, Greg. And that's the catch, because even if one hand was available, the dog could have had it, but the problem is Comel's missing too, so they screwed up. The staging of the scene had made many mistakes here, and that's how we narrowed it down to that these were amateurs who did this, because this was done very haphazardly.
Can we kind of stay on the hand for a second here? Go ahead, Walter.
No,
I think you're...
I'm curious, because this bugs me. Why, if you're killing them, why would you want to remove it? And the fact is, there's going to be identification of the bodies. If you don't want them identified, you get rid of the bodies. You just make them disappear, and people wonder. If this was professional, they would have taken care of the dirty issues after it. This does come out.
And there's
and the missing arms. What was the point? The missing hands. I don't think that had anything to do with identification. I don't think that was post-mortem. I think that was there beforehand. In fact, I don't think they were killed in this house. Possibly.
But why get rid of the right hand? Why not get rid of the left hand? Right? Because everybody's going to know David is right-handed. It's throwing them off. Like, did something go wrong?
This is something in which somebody who didn't know what they were doing, and maybe they were just trying to confuse the scene, or they just didn't know what they were doing and were thinking one thing and did one thing and then think, oh no, let's try this. I don't know, but this comes across. One, first of all, I am totally convinced, and I think anybody that looks at this, first of all, knows David.
You would think that.
David had nothing to do with it. And secondly, we don't know if the arms and hands, whatever their state, were removed post-mortem. That strikes me as a very strong possibility in this, that they may have been tortured. And when you take somebody's arm off, that would be extremely painful. Or watching your wife's hands being, quote unquote, removed physically in your presence. It sounds like there was torture involved. This is something that I think goes deeper into punishment almost. And that means they did something, in my opinion, the husband and wife might have been in collusion on it. What did they do to offend somebody that they were done? And to watch their daughter have an arm removed. And this is getting deeper into things like who would be, and first of all, I have to think you would have to use some type of device to remove a hand. A human being generally is not going to be able to pull an arm off unless they're incredibly, and I mean incredibly, strong and massive. Now, there are some that could probably do it.
If you have a struggle.
Yeah, but unless there's more than one.
That would be the first sign of a struggle, is the daughter's missing arm.
But the thing about it is, I don't think they were killed in the home. That's another thing. I don't think they have the total crime scene. Because if they were missing, those arms were removed. If they were removed there, they would be there or on the premises somewhere.
Well, here's what we've got, Walter. I know, Greg, you want to circle back around to that hand, because that is an important part, and it ties this whole thing back into it. For the newer listeners out there, we also have to look into this evidence. Now, we go back to the evidence. There is blood on the floor and on the walls in that living room. And by people who have looked at it, professionals that have looked at it, all identify that blood as being medium velocity blood spatter, not high velocity. The 40 caliber Springfield handgun would produce high velocity blood spatter on the ceiling, the walls, the floor, everywhere. And if you get 3 people shot with hollow point bullets, there's going to be blood and high velocity blood spatter everywhere. Now there is blood, but it's medium velocity. So that would account for a beating of some sort and a torture of some sort while someone was still alive. That would account for the blood. So like you said, Walter, did the murder take place in that house or in that room? Possibly not. But someone, we know for a fact someone was beaten in that house and in that room. And then whatever happened, we don't know how they were killed or where they were killed. But the bodies were dumped there subsequently. That's what the evidence tells us. What are your thoughts on that? And then we can go back to that hand, Greg, because that's Comel's hand. She's laying on her stomach. On the couch was to the right side of her. Her right hand was either underneath her, crossed underneath her, or laying up against that couch. Either way, the dog had no ways to get at it, and her left hand was either out or tucked underneath her, potentially to have. But remember now that the wife, Comel, was Muslim at one point in her life. Of the three bullet fragments that were found, let's see, was there 4 bullet fragments that had flesh on them? 3 were attributable to Comel, 1 to the daughter. So instead of everyone getting shot once, the evidence supports the fact that Comel was shot up to 3 times herself and had both hands removed. And there was blood writing on the wall that says Allahu Akbar, and there was a Quran at the scene on the floor opened up, covered with blood then as well. So it also had a Muslim Islamic extremist angle to it, which I think was also done by amateurs who made it look like some sort of scene, but someone had a big vengeance of some sort toward Comel, the Muslim. The whole thing had a Muslim angle to it. David looks like he may not have even been the primary victim, but someone's blood was there on the floor that resulted from a beating, and we don't know whose blood that was. I don't think it says. Do you know, Greg?
No, I don't. No.
This is one of those things where I think this was multiple sites that they were dealt with, and were done. It had his daughter and wife killed and dropped there, and they finished him off there. There's different scenarios that come up with the thought here.
Right.
And
right.
I think, and it could have been possibly an honor killing, in that she disgraced her family by marrying an American that was tied to somewhat of a Christian background, or that could have been a possibility.
Definitely. Definitely.
And the thing is, or somebody staged it to make it look like that.
Right.
It could be that.
It can only be one or the other, right?
It's either one or the other in that. And that angle I thought about. And one of the things Muslims do in the ancient world, when you cut off the hands and the feet or the head, that was to show they were cut off. They were unclean. They're no good. And that could be true here. But if you're an experienced hitman and you know the culture and you want to kill somebody and get away with it, you can make it look like it is that. So that angle has to be considered to some extent because of the disfigurement of the bodies. And it would be consistent with the Middle East style honor killing. Take the head, take the hands or the arms, and do that. Take them away and remove it. It's part trophy, showing the family, yes, I did this. Because when somebody kills somebody in the ancient world, bring me the head. Show me that face that I can see is dead. That's good. Then I know you've completed the task. So that.
Yeah, but there's still some of the. I mean, how much of the head do they take? Because if we're talking about the whole head, then again, it's
all
like
they have to do is take enough so they can get a facial recognition.
Well, they probably could have got his whole face. I mean, there's literally just the back of the skull cap left. There's nothing else there.
So it's interesting that most of the, if you shoot somebody in the head, the whole head will be there in pieces. And if it's missing, somebody took it. And they had a reason for doing that. And generally, in the old world style, that would be as an identifier that this has been done and that somebody sent somebody to do this. That's another angle. And especially...
It still doesn't, I mean, it doesn't explain why the police... I mean, how does anyone who does something like this, how do they tie it to David, and how do the police fall for that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, this is not tied to David whatsoever. He may have been...
But they're making that tie. I'm saying from their view, why would they do that?
But, it's not from the evidence. I can't see the evidence. That's the total point.
Well, that's logic, if you want to bring logic and truth into it, sure.
And this is the point. So this is something that's not, plausible in this case. This case is really a disaster. Well, everybody knows that. And I've used this show to get the details from Dan and from Catherine, and I'm going, wait, wow. And hearing more details as I have heard them, this is indicating this is more than a strange case, but it might be done as a hit, maybe not for the government, but for somebody. And I don't think this is the only site in which they were dealt with. I think this was the end point where they ended up. And the back door being open is they came in and put the bodies in there and then left out that back door. But
multiple people would have seen him. All the neighbors would have seen him.
Would have, maybe not. It depends on.
I mean,
if you want to get in there,
these are just fences. Their backyards are not like Cali. They're just fences. Like you can literally see into their house. But
yet nobody saw anything, and this occurred.
Right. Right.
And this occurred, and they went out the back door, obviously, in some case. So they were able to get by somehow, and that means they could have brought the bodies in, and this smells like this was not the site that, at least that, I think David was killed in the house. I think his daughter may have been killed elsewhere and brought in, and they just showed him the bodies and were doing for whatever reason to him and finished him off there, maybe. Because that would have been maybe, and you were saying maybe Carmel is the target, and it's not David. I don't know that, if Carmel was a target, if it's an honor killing, generally they're going to go after the person that dishonored them. That is the woman. In the Middle East and in Middle Eastern or Muslim, do
they go after children?
And now they can say the offspring are dirty too, get rid of them both. If this was the case and David came in on it, you have a tie-in. That could have been true. Because they said, he sees this, he sees me, got to get rid of him too. And it was more than one person doing this, though. I think there was more than one person involved, that they possibly were Muslim. I don't believe the gentleman involved in the project would have killed his family and friends, killed his friend and his family, and killed the daughter and the wife. He would have been mad at him. It's not them that were there. So that eliminates him, in my opinion, first off.
He does have motive, though. I mean, there is motive there. And I'm not accusing him of anything, but there is some...
He would have wanted to catch him alone and off him. He wouldn't have wanted to kill the little girl he knew.
Get the next of kin, right? You get the next of kin.
We haven't brought that up yet.
He knew the daughter. He knew the daughter. He knew the wife. What angst, or why would he want to kill them and add insult to injury? That's not anything except somebody that wants to punish the head of the house. That comes from a Muslim angle, to be honest. So I don't think the partner...
But have you ever seen an honor killing like this, where there's Quran pages ripped out? how does someone who is doing some honor killing, that would go against that. That would totally go against writing Allahu Akbar in blood on a wall, in their victim's blood. That would go against that.
That's true. However, unless they're infuriated. And that's, I mean, there's a
or they're not a real Muslim.
Infuriated, yeah, and could have been accidentally done. That can be attributed. When they were doing an honor killing, say, oh, I hurt the Quran when I was, but you were doing the right thing. So I tend to look at this as a possibility.
Like Waco.
Well, yeah, you get somebody in a religious fervor of honor and desecration and wanting to restore your honor and to punish the one who brought the dishonor. This seems to line up, and the removal of an arm, hands, and that, and maybe desecrating the head is a very virile way of demonstrating the judgment, quote unquote, that should come upon an infidel. And that's
well, there were people that said that there was a hand found in the basement of that house. Okay. And that turned out to be just more lies. And I believe that was also Sean Wright. Wasn't that Sean Wright then, or was that Mason Hendricks? Or maybe both. I forget.
Potentially
I do remember they told me that. Yeah, I think it was both
so
too.
This doesn't, I know it's not David Crowley that did this. In my opinion, it's strong evidence that it is not. In fact, I think it's pretty clear evidence indicates he didn't do this. I think we can all agree with that very quickly. Second, that it was more than one person involved in this, and that this may not have been the total scene of the crime right there. Do y'all agree with that? Because that's what I'm seeing. This may not have been the final and only place these people were harmed.
But you would need a police cover-up. Yes, there's definitely something weird going on here, and there's no evidence that David Crowley is guilty, but if, there would still need to be a reason why the police are covering this up. That's another one that's also bothering me. When it's so clear-cut that David Crowley is not guilty, why would they care? They're putting themselves at risk. I mean, they're making themselves look bad. Why? Well, why go to such a length here?
Well, the thing that comes to mind is it was so horrendous, one. Two, the obvious perpetrator, maybe they know the perpetrator or of the perpetrators, and they're beyond their jurisdiction to get, which would then mean, well, we have evidence that it's this person, we're looking to get them they don't have an explanation. And it might be of such a nature that they can't do anything. I don't know why, but it does indicate to me, and even at a state level, you don't get any feedback. That means it goes higher than the state level. Something above state level that tells the state, stay out of it. So it's getting higher and higher. Where does it go? Well, if you go to the federal level, what would happen? I'm going to tell you right now, the federals will defer back to the locals and will go, if they call us in, we'll look into it. But that's not going to happen. This goes above state level authority. Therefore, that puts it to a federal level authority. And did they consult with the feds on this? Did anybody?
Well, can we contact them? Can we contact them and see if maybe they could help? Could the FBI help?
We need to ask questions as where did this? Because when there's a case like this, sometimes the FBI is called. Hey, this is a weird one. We have missing body parts, and this could be something where this happened elsewhere. We don't know. It could have happened far away. We don't know. So this is one of those cases that is beyond strange. It's actually scarily strange. Who would want to remove arms and kill a 5-year-old and remove her arm? That's not normal. And that would have been something to affect David, in my opinion. The torture, when you see your wife and child in trauma, it drives you nuts. And if you can't do anything, you go, you're out there. So I see torture in this, first of all. And the fact
are there any signs of torture that we would find in the autopsies?
Well, you could. Contusions under the skin, you'd have bruising. But the torture may have been just the removal of the arm, the hands. And it seems like a stepped-up procedure. You would start with the hands. Oh, look at your wife's pretty hands. Oops, there it goes. Oh, and her arm. Oh, my goodness, look at this. Look what you've done to us. Now look what you brought on your family. And it smells like that. Because if you want to just ice somebody and get them out of the way because you have a problem like a business deal, you kill them. You kill them. Okay, you're mad. You've vented your anger. You got rid of the family. You shot them. They're dead. But this goes far beyond. It's, you hear of crimes of passion. This shows deep-seated psychological terrorizing murder. Terrorizing. And it goes really deep, real deep. That Middle Eastern thing comes up. And they're saying now, why, if they were trying to get people to think it was a Muslim honor killing, Allahu Akbar would be right there. Unless you were trying to sidetrack it. The attitude could be to throw this whole case off with that. They have to determine that by her family. Her family would be the one to do that. And did they check with her family? Were they in the area? That's another angle. That would be a brother or a relation or a friend of the family. Were they in the area at that time? As a police investigator, that with Allahu Akbar there, I'd be looking, okay, let's see if any Muslim family friends were here, or family, or were they close by, or any Muslim who was aware of the situation of Kamal was there. Is there any type of mosque close by? What is involved with that? Because that would be an area with Allahu Akbar that would be part of the investigation. I didn't hear of anything like that even being tendered in this investigation. And with that, that's a problem. Because you have direct evidence that it's a possibility with the blood on the wall. And with the arms and hands and the heads as they were, that's another indication possibly that there was an honor killing, and the removal of the head, hands, and arms were a part of that's the judgment that's on you. So this is a bigger case. And is her family of royal blood? Is she part of any family that is part of the hierarchy of Saudi Arabia or any official in the Muslim world? That would come into my mind. Let me look at that angle. That would tie into this, and especially in the way they were killed, and that the evidence indicates is possibly not the only crime scene. So I see lots of problems in this that needed to be addressed, which seemingly didn't even come into the perusal of the officers or anybody investigating this from this horrible crime, which was not David Crowley. And I think that the killing of the whole family indicates possibly a Muslim thing, because our Muslim sister has committed, a hate crime against us. We're going to kill her. Oh, and the offspring, they're dirty, they're unclean, they're made from this guy, and that's anathema to us. Get rid of her too. That would line up with it. And the only other thing outside of that would be somebody who's psychopathic. If it was just a random killer that came in on them and did this, he would be a severe psychopath, and to qualify it as a suicide murder would have a psychopath out there. This is a deadly conclusion to this case, because the people who did this, or those who did it, are still in existence out there and can do it again. To whom? Nobody would know. But this is a very severe breach of justice, not only for the family, but for the community, because those people could be local to that community and they're still there. So these are problems that I see that are pushed aside by the state level, like I said, and do not have any in further investigation, at least that we can see. They may have looked further and went, oops, they go to a certain point and find out enough that they go, now we have to leave it here. Publicly investigated, maybe not. But there might be those who have known it, and if you talk to officers, I remember Greg saying they won't talk about it. That means somebody has muzzled them, and it's not just they don't want to talk about it. They have been told, you will not talk about it. And that illustrates an even greater, higher than state level, coming down from somewhere, federal, maybe, or maybe not. It could be something outside of that, which has influence in their police work that says, you can't get it, you won't, because this is who and what did this, and if you don't want it to happen again, just leave it alone. We dealt with them, leave it there. So there is that distinct possibility, and it's not a great thing to think about, but sometimes the police are hogtied by higher authorities that say, leave it alone. I know you're disgusted. We know who did it. You know now. Leave it alone. Be quiet. Because it's at this level, we cannot do anything. And that's why I was concerned about if she, Comel, was tied to anything royal, because this goes up into her hierarchy of the Muslim faith and leadership. Could it have had something to do with that? In which it's consulate level or above. And then they would just say, drop it, leave it alone. And so this smells like that. It just looks like it, it smells like it, but it doesn't mean it's that totally. Like I said, it could be a distract to push it that way, in which it is not. But the fact that the police aren't looking at it may tend to point that direction. That's not my final answer, but it is something that I look at critically and think that it has great import in here just based on what it is.
Correct. I think too that the fact that I mentioned the target or the victim as being Comel being shot 3 times, I want to just clarify that I don't think that she was the target of the crime, but I think that there was a reason that overkill was included for her. Now, we don't know what that is, but for some reason, whoever did this went overboard when it got to her, and that question needs to be answered. I don't know why. I think that the target was David, but for some reason, if she was shot 2 or at least or possibly 3 times, and then her blood was used on the wall for writing Allah Akbar, and the Quran was there, someone went overboard to make it look like this this whole honor killing type of a thing, and I think that was the result of amateurs who didn't know enough about the culture, but they thought they did, because anyone who knows the background and the culture of this easily knows that this is not some kind of an honor killing whatsoever. So it was made to look that way, but it was very goofy. The other angle is the if all 3 were killed, like you said, Walter, if you've got a beef, if the business partner has a beef with David, or if the government has a beef with David, they would kill David, right?
That's right.
Why is the daughter and why is the wife brutally murdered as well? So it gets back into this, the error of the project. Now you're dealing with a $30 million project, or what I would call the value of the project is sitting at $30 million. That's very enticing to someone. If they kill David and they don't have the rights to it, it's going to naturally fall to the wife. And if the wife is killed, it's going to fall to the daughter. What's the best way that a family member could get the entire package falling in their lap is if they wipe out the remaining heirs of the family. So this leads back now to David's family. Keep in mind that Comel's family was living in Texas. David's family consisted of a older sister who was living in Chicago at the time, an older brother who was unemployed and living here in the Twin Cities, and a father who was divorced from the mother, living about 45 minutes out of the town, and then the mother also about 45 minutes away that suspiciously wound up dead only 7 months later after the killings. The mother wound up dead, and the brother they were not on good terms. They had a fight, some kind of spat that happened also in August, around the same time as this daughter's birthday party. So the spat was so bad that they weren't even on talking terms. And David was pulling himself away from his relationship with his father, so much so that he got a new phone and didn't tell his father what the number was. So there was a dynamic here of David's family. The mother winds up dead, the brother wasn't talking to him, and David didn't personally like or respect his own father. Now, what we see in the financial statements here when looking into the finances and the odd banking irregularities that we see is in the month of October, in David Crowley's father's bank account, there's a $50,000 cash withdrawal made at a local branch. Not an ATM, but cash withdrawal at a teller. Now, this bank account, because it was shared when the investigators looked into the banking and the finances of David Crowley, he was a trustee on the family's trust. The father had a trust account set up, a POD account, payable only on death when the father died, for each of the three kids to have access to these funds. Now, the dad is still alive, so therefore he has rights, and the only person to have rights to this bank account. There was hundreds of thousands of dollars in that, typically $200,000 to $300,000 balance at any given time. In October, there's a $50,000 cash withdrawal. Now, in October, David's father tells police he was in Germany that entire month on business. He was in Germany. So once again, if we stay focused on the facts and not go down speculation here, we know that David's father was in October in Germany on business. His business, he was an entrepreneur and a millionaire, and conducted business all over the world. And so he was away, per the police reports. And the withdrawal was made in the middle of the month of October, and it was made in cash at a deposit at an actual location, at a branch location here in the Twin Cities. Go ahead.
Okay, now he was the one that took out the money.
His account, his name was on the account, but he didn't take out the money.
And he was the only one that had access or the ability, though, but he would have to authorize somebody to take out money then.
Well, the part of the Freedom of Information Act we got back was that actual withdrawal slip that was filled out at the bank by the father, allegedly.
So, that $50,000. Who were you saying that got the money?
Well, it appears to be the father's name is written, but it does not appear to be the father's signature that got that money out. So some have speculated that it's the brother that he was having the problems with. Now, the brother, unemployed, $50,000 rings a lot of bells for people as a possible payment to a hitman. And $50,000 for the murder of 3 people could easily fall into that range, and that is reasonable. Did his brother take out the money to pay a team of a hitman or two to do this? I don't know. We don't know that answer.
And what motive would he have had to take him out? And then to make it obvious by taking $50,000 from his dad's account, which would lead directly to him.
Well, that family would land that movie script into their lap if the remaining heirs all died. That gets back to the reason that all 3 had to die. If you go down the scenario of why all 3 died, not that it was an accident, not that someone walked in and surprised someone, but all 3 needed to die for that project to fall into the family's lap of the Crowleys, the remaining Crowleys. Now, the mother would not have liked that one bit. The mother was the only one who questioned that David did this at all. But 7 months later, she winds up dead, slumped over her patio on her backyard for unsuspicious. We still don't know the official reason why she suspiciously died.
They don't have any autopsy report on that?
The only autopsy was she's got gastrointestinal problems, and she was an alcoholic and drank a lot and had recurring problems in her gut. They didn't say exactly why she died, but she was just found that way by her boyfriend, after midnight one night, sitting outside in the month of August. And that was quickly brushed aside.
Now we see a little bit of a different angle.
Exactly.
But the problem is the project hasn't gone forth, and there's that.
So was the project supposed to go on
But
forth?
they tried. Yeah,
They
because they
did
did
try.
Ah, now we're getting somewhere. I wasn't aware of that. So,
And Greg, tell Walter who was pushing the project forth.
That would have been Danny Mason, I would think, right?
Yes.
Danny Mason and Joe Biggs and another guy named Elvis.
So Danny August Mason,
Go
ahead.
What's that?
Were they working with the family doing this?
More than likely, yes.
They would have to, it would seem.
Danny August Mason, 4 months after the bodies were found, was creating a new company in the state of Minnesota, Secretary of State, called Gray State Universe LLC, and was moving forward with the project from a business angle and from a business front. And now he didn't have cash because he spent all his time and blood, sweat, and tears on this project and didn't have anything. So he was looking, I think, to score big, and this is my opinion. He needed to get a hold of that script, but the only way to get a hold of that script is to get in close with the family, whereas that family, the remaining heirs, would be eliminated from the situation and it would fall nicely into their lap. So now we've got a family connection and a business associate connection that may or may not have been working together in this situation. Now, Greg, you had mentioned earlier about the cover-up. I just wanted to say to Walter and the other listening out there, I firmly believe the cover-up of this murder took place at the federal level after the killings. They were not involved in the conspiracy of the killings themselves. I think they came in later to aid and abet the cover-up itself. These are two different events in my mind. The cover-up came in later. It had nothing to do with the feds, had nothing to do with this in forward, but they're certainly involved, in my mind, 100% in the cover-up, in the aftermath of all this.
That means there has to be
I would definitely agree, 100%.
There has to be a tie there. There has to be a link that can pull that into view.
So
you just got to have friends in high places.
For that to happen, there has to be a purpose for it. The feds and nobody take any cover-up unless they have something that they are getting out of the deal.
Now, if we made a suggestion, Walter, if I was to tell you that in this Gray State project there may have been 1, 2, or up to 3 people that were informants at the federal level or plants that were set up to infiltrate David's project,
that would be normal, in my opinion.
Which we think is the case. So now we're dealing with connections that were possibly informants set to infiltrate, because I do think that the federal government did have an interest in David's project. So he had people, there was eyes and ears on the inside of this project, I believe.
I would concur with that.
Now, when I set up this justice page on Facebook, the only threats that I received right off the bat came from the person that we believe is one of those informants. And that would make sense why they would want a page like this shut down looking for the truth, because if he is involved and if he is an informant and connected to the subsequent cover-up at the federal level, that would really cause some of these players some angst. And now I think it's all tying together.
Well, it certainly lends credence to the fact that the feds covered it up, because if they had infiltrated, and that puts in another aspect of this which would make it an advantage for them to cover their tracks in a way that nobody knew what they were doing and why. But they would have an interest in this, I know. And especially in Hollywood, they have people there. And if the information they got was that it was worth a big interest for them to follow this, they would send people to get in there. And they have the right people to do that.
Yeah, let's say they had a high-level informant who did something that they shouldn't have done, and now somebody's got to cover their tracks.
That is exactly where I was going.
And because of national security, blah, 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 blah.
And that would excuse, quote, unquote, this altogether, and would be a national security cover, so that would cover every jurisdiction and everybody. And there would be no way this case would get open no matter what anybody said, did, or brought forth. And that is where the threats come in. And that was a very unfederal action that he took to do that. Because if you're federal and it's already covered, you don't threaten people. You leave it.
Well, that's like Whitey Bulge, right? I mean, there's plenty high-level informants.
And the thing about it is, if you're in government and you have a problem, you don't make it worse by talk. You don't. If there's a problem, they deal with it in whatever faction and way will make the problem cease. That's how professionals work it. They just go, oh, talk. They don't come and warn you. They're not the mafia. They're the government. They can do what they need.
So what we have, Walter, is several other instances of amateurish behavior by potentially informants at the federal level. So David's killed, the Gray State Project ultimately dies, and then post the deaths, a series of Facebook posts were removed, deleted, and or hidden from David's personal Facebook page. So now we got some other amateurish behavior going on, and we've got screenshots of it as well. These are all gone now, completely gone off some of these pages. David's personal page, things were hacked into.
Well, it sounds like a sloppy job done by somebody who was trying to cover for an event like this. And it stands to reason that it might have been a rogue agent who did something he shouldn't have done. That is a strange possibility, as I call it, who just kind of went his way and did what he did, and then it's, oops, what, you idiot, no. And then what do we do about this? All right, clean up, aisle 6, get it done. It sounds like a bad takeout of a problematic area that was done prematurely, and then they had to mop up the mess, thinking from that angle. And how would they do it? Shut everybody up, clean it up, tell them why, national security, keep quiet, stay out of it. That really starts to shine in this perspective.
And now you get a potential federal government, which I include in with that is the media is your number one aid to help discredit those pushing the wrong angles. We get a documentary called A Gray State done that showed at the Tribeca Film Festival. It was on A&E. It's now showing on Netflix, a highly done documentary by Eric Nelson that really shows the crazed, delusional David Crowley doing all this. And before the movie came out, there was a companion piece written in the New Yorker by an author named Alec Wilkinson that had almost the same script handed to him to write a hit piece on David Crowley. So this isn't just small to medium-sized media outlets. These are top-notch, top levels, which leads me to indicate that the federal government is included, because now you've got these propaganda artists, very good, mind you, propaganda artists pushing this story, which is otherwise hasn't been really followed up at the local or state level here at all. So someone else is involved pushing this story. Now, to credit them, most of our traffic, Greg, I would say, to our justice page on Facebook is driven from people who watch the documentary on Netflix and come away feeling something's not right in the way they just got fed propaganda in this whole movie because it just doesn't sit right with them. So we'd like to take this time to also thank Eric Nelson for his time on the documentary, because that's really driving the traffic to our page and waking up the general public.
They need to be awakened on this one. But now, knowing some of these other facts, and I assumed, based on his project, that the government would have noticed, and especially if he's going to Hollywood, that information would have gotten back to them very quickly. And having plants in there would be the norm. They implant everywhere they can get. That's the normal thing. They have their hands everywhere. The CIA would be involved at, the NSA, and they're very good about getting good people in place. And they can do it based on just one. They get prime individuals.
And just one more thing to add with these individuals. A lot of the people that we're talking about here in the Gray State Project were close friends of David that all became close friends all within a 3 to 5 year period. They weren't longtime friends. They weren't longtime associates, but people who entered David's orbit, so to say, within a 3 to 5 year period before all this happened. So there's where your antenna should be raised for the listeners out there.
Yeah, especially tying to this project. That's the other angle, getting the plants in there. And a rogue agent who kind of went out of his way to clean up the area may have been doing this, and they had to circle the wagons because how badly it was done. Rather, maybe a neophyte agent, a young agent, who thought he was doing, quote, a favor, or doing the old government good guy who is wanting to promote himself and move up the ranks, takes care of a problem. That rings a bell in my mind. So, and the circling of the wagons and the shutting it down certainly points a direction that way also. In fact, that could be the highest point gatherer in this little discussion tonight. It certainly bears a mark of why nobody would do it, and why there would be a veiled, threat in the words of, well, it'd be best that you don't continue looking at this. Not a threat, just a implication of problems if you continue. How many threats have you received there, Dan?
A handful of threats like that, mainly to shut it down, don't talk about it, and also the strange comment that I heard several times is, look, we've got this covered, leave it alone. I thought that was very strange. We've got this covered, we've got people on it.
Now that tells me greatly. Right now, this is at a level this is at a very high level.
Greg, tell Walter the messages, some of the quotes that you have been told as far as some of the agencies potentially putting you under a microscope by following this case.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was Sean Wright, and Sean Wright was the one who said that if I kept going down this rabbit hole, if I kept looking at the things that Dan Hennen and Thomas Lapp are looking at, that I'm going to be like them. I'm going to be put under a microscope by the DHS and the FBI. And I asked Detective Gummert if the DHS or the FBI was involved in this case, and he said no. So I don't know. It's just one more scare tactic, but it was so unnecessary to even contact me. Just some random guy who's just looking into this stuff. It did not make sense.
Yeah, that doesn't. And you had mentioned the threats, and there was another guy named Mason Hendricks that I was talking to, and he was also saying, he mentioned the Department of Homeland Security and that they had to sign off on this case, and that's why it took a year to close this case.
which, again, we asked Gummer, no. Now, these are the same people that said that there was a hand in the basement. Again, we asked Gummer. He said no. So what are these guys doing?
Well, he wouldn't necessarily want to talk about
what's their end game.
And he would, the reality is, if it is a higher level government, the lower level guys are not going to say, yes, it is, first and foremost. They'll immediately say no.
Well, they might not know. They might not even know.
That's the point. They might not know, and they may think, no, we haven't had any contact with that. And it still might be true. Now, the Department of Homeland Security having to, quote, unquote, sign off on it meant that David Crowley was touching on something of national security, which would make sense. Which would make sense based on where he was, because in Afghanistan they were doing things, a lot of things. I'm not going to go into it, but I found some stuff that I was looking at that I went, whoa, you know what? They're doing stuff there that if the public got a hold of it, and the reasons, they wouldn't believe it at first. But if you got credible evidence about what was going on, the government would want to shut that down immediately. Obviously, in my opinion, just my opinion only, not saying he did, but I think he was digging into things that were part of a government operation that was ongoing and might still be ongoing, and that they do not want to be public in any fashion due to their objective, complete the mission. And, higher people than him have been killed over things like that. And up into congressmen and people that are going into areas that they should not, as they determine from an authority base, sometimes based mainly in the Pentagon, or tied to that, the military-industrial complex, which has many things that they do not want out there. And they are willing to obfuscate, eradicate, kill, and do whatever. And now that I get all of these other facts that I wasn't quite there on, this, like I said, to shut down a state and local government, you have to have diplomatic power at the high levels or federal power at the high levels. And based on the information of the project and this, I think it's in the federal international level in that, and that's why it is shut down. And that's why I think, realistically, as much as we can talk about it and do these programs, I am assuming that they're going to want to keep it just the way it is, for whatever reasons. My thought is the reason is they had an agent involved. He did something that was traceable because of the mere fact of how the crime scene was left. Was a bad decision on his part because he was doing it, quote, for the greater good, whatever that means. And due to the fact that he was maybe trying to go only for Mr. Crowley, but daughter and wife came in and oops, and or he included them to get information, and it just was done. So I think that this is more an issue of federal and dealt with something of secure nature in the military or government level. And I think, truthfully, we're going to be talking a lot about it, but I think there's going to be no movement.
Yep, I agree, Walter.
I just feel it now. I just look at it and go, okay. Now I've got a fuller spectrum on it, and I remember when I was in the government and I had to do certain things, and the attitude was, on this stuff, if anybody finds out about this, or this, you just tell them, don't do it. And if they do it, let us know, we'll handle it. Oops, okay. I didn't know at the time, I wasn't thinking about the outcomes of that, but this smells like that. So anyway, Dan, I want to thank you for joining us. Greg, appreciate you allowing me in on this, as I was not following as much as you were, but I have been digging into it a little here and there. And getting these facts, I now see a government angle that is preemptive over everything. And I think that this was maybe a rogue agent or an agent that was instructed to do one thing and went beyond the pale and hit the wrong notes, and they had to clean up the mess. And they're not going to let that go. And so we've come to a conclusion point where it is, we kind of have an idea, truly, I think, of what it was, but our progress can't get much further unless we go rogue ourselves and go into areas and do it quietly. You can't just, with these types of situations, you can't just run with it, because it could end up badly. And I think they're serious in saying what they're saying based on that, and it doesn't frighten me. I'm not frightened of people. I follow the Father, but when it gets to this point, the Father would say sometimes, well, let me handle it at this point, and maybe that's where we are. And they can't escape things. And nothing, I'm a man of faith, so anyway, that's my take as Walter Bradley here. And Dan, you've filled in a lot of the holes that I needed to, along with Greg here tonight. And I see this as an area that is pretty much one of those that you'll never progress beyond where they're willing to let you go, in my opinion. And I think this is one of those boxed cases, meaning, it's all boxed up. You may want to open that box, but they've sealed it. And there might not be any progress. As much as we want justice for this family, that justice may be delayed until the last day, so to speak. And but in that, there's no escaping it, from my perspective. And any final comments before you go, Dan?
No, just like to thank the members joining the group, and we're going to continue on and look for justice for this family and move forward under the realization that nothing will probably ever come of it, but
at least we're announcing the truth.
Sorry, what was that?
I said, but at least we're pronouncing the truth.
Yes, exactly. I agree with that.
But thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
You do. Take care, man. Thanks a lot.